There comes a point in every connection where sending one more message feels like the only thing left to do. You convince yourself that if you can just find the right words, the right timing, or the perfect explanation, they'll finally understand how much you care. But with an avoidant person, that instinct often works against you. Every additional text can unintentionally create more pressure instead of more closeness. The silence that follows feels confusing because no one explains why someone who seemed genuinely interested suddenly becomes distant just as things begin to feel emotionally meaningful. What most people misunderstand about avoidant attachment is that the normal rules of communication often don't apply in the same way. The approaches that build closeness with emotionally secure people can unintentionally trigger withdrawal in someone whose nervous system associates intimacy with emotional danger. If you've ever poured your heart into a conversation only to watch them become quieter, more distant, or less responsive, you've already experienced this pattern. It can leave you wondering what changed or what you did wrong. But the better question isn't how to make them care more, it's how to communicate without activating the fears they've spent years trying to avoid. Before understanding the messages that work, it's important to understand the psychology behind them. An avoidant person is not emotionally distant because they feel less than everyone else. Often, they withdraw because they feel more than they're comfortable expressing. At some point in their life, usually very early, they learned that emotional dependence came with disappointment, rejection, inconsistency, or pain. Their nervous system adapted by creating distance whenever closeness began to feel emotionally risky. That protective system becomes incredibly efficient. They may notice every detail about you, think about you more often than they admit, and genuinely enjoy your presence. Yet the moment those feelings become intense enough to make them vulnerable, an internal alarm sounds. Instead of moving closer, they instinctively create distance. It isn't usually a conscious decision to reject someone. It's an automatic attempt to protect themselves from emotional exposure. So the goal changes completely. Instead of asking, "How do I make them like me more?" the healthier question becomes, how do I communicate in a way that feels emotionally safe instead of emotionally demanding? That shift changes everything. The first approach is what many people call the no-pressure check-in. Pressure is often what triggers an avoidant person's withdrawal. Even an innocent message like "How are you?" can carry hidden emotional expectations if it silently communicates, "I need you to engage with me right now." A low-pressure message sounds different. It might simply say, "Hey, no need to reply right away. This reminded me of you." Then you attach something genuinely connected to their interests. Maybe it's a funny video, an article about something they've talked about, or a photo connected to a shared memory. Then you stop. You don't add another message. You don't ask if they miss you. You don't look for reassurance. The reason this works is surprisingly simple. You've removed the feeling of obligation. Avoidant individuals often don't run from affection itself. They run from the feeling that they owe someone an emotional response. When the expectation disappears, their nervous system relaxes. They have room to choose connection instead of feeling forced into it. This approach becomes even more meaningful when what you share reflects something specific they've told you before. If they once mentioned a favorite place, an unusual hobby, or a meaningful childhood memory, and weeks later you remember it naturally, you're communicating something much deeper than interest. You're showing that you listened, you remembered, you cared enough to notice without expecting anything back. Those quiet moments often stay with someone far longer than dramatic emotional conversations. The second approach is the confident, low-investment reach-out. This one cannot be performed convincingly unless it reflects your genuine emotional state. Avoidant people tend to notice emotional inconsistency quickly. Imagine sending something simple like, "Just had the strangest day. It would have made you laugh. Hope yours has been easier." Or perhaps, "This city keeps surprising me." You would have rolled your eyes at this. Notice what's happening. You're inviting them briefly into your world without asking them to carry the conversation. You're sharing a moment instead of requesting emotional labor. That distinction matters. Avoidants are often drawn toward people who clearly have full, meaningful lives of their own. When someone seems emotionally centered, pursuing goals, enjoying experiences, and maintaining their own identity outside the relationship, they become interesting rather than overwhelming. Someone whose entire emotional world revolves around them can unintentionally activate pressure. Someone whose life continues moving forward naturally creates curiosity. The confidence here isn't arrogance, it's quiet emotional steadiness. You're not trying to impress them, you're simply allowing them to see who you are. The third approach is the open door callback. This is especially useful after a period of distance or silence. Imagine plans were never finalized or communication simply faded. Most people react in one of two ways. They either send a long emotional explanation demanding clarity, or they disappear completely while secretly hoping the other person notices. The open door callback takes another path. It sounds like, "Still happy to grab that coffee whenever life slows down. No pressure." Or perhaps that restaurant we talked about finally opened. The invitation still stands if you ever feel like going. These messages accomplish several things at once. They acknowledge the shared connection. They communicate that you're not resentful. They leave room for reconnection without demanding immediate action. For someone with avoidant tendencies, this can feel unexpectedly safe. One of their deepest fears is that emotional closeness inevitably leads to disappointment, conflict, or abandonment. They often distance themselves first because they expect the relationship to end eventually anyway. When you calmly leave the door open without guilt, blame, or emotional pressure, you gently challenge that expectation. You're quietly saying, the connection doesn't have to disappear just because there was distance. That kind of emotional steadiness is rare. However, this only works if your intention is sincere. If you're secretly hoping they'll feel guilty or panic into returning, the emotional tone usually comes through. Avoidant individuals often become highly sensitive to hidden emotional agendas because they develop that awareness early in life as part of their own survival. The fourth approach is less about a specific message and more about an overall philosophy. It could be called the disappearing act, but not in the sense of playing games. You send something thoughtful, then you genuinely return to your own life. You don't immediately send another message. You don't repeatedly check whether they've seen it. You don't build your day around waiting for a response. You simply continue living. This creates something avoidants rarely experience: emotional space. Many people accidentally communicate anxiety after reaching out. Every follow-up message quietly says, "I'm waiting." Your silence, when it's genuine rather than strategic, communicates something entirely different. I enjoy talking with you, but my emotional stability doesn't depend on this conversation. That is an incredibly calming message for someone whose nervous system fears becoming responsible for another person's emotional well-being. It's important to understand that this is not about pretending not to care. It's about caring without abandoning yourself. Many people misunderstand this idea and turn it into manipulation by intentionally delaying replies or trying to provoke anxiety. That's not emotional security. That's another form of control. Healthy emotional space comes naturally because your life is genuinely full. You have work that matters, friendships that nourish you, goals you're pursuing, and interests that continue whether someone texts back today or tomorrow. When you communicate from that place, your messages carry a very different emotional energy. All four of these approaches share the same deeper principle. None of them are really about finding magical words. They're about creating an emotional experience that feels safe rather than overwhelming. Each message quietly communicates the same truth. I enjoy connecting with you, but I'm not trying to control you. For someone who learned early that closeness often became pressure, obligation, or disappointment, that experience feels remarkably different. At the same time, it's essential to remember something equally important. No message, no matter how thoughtfully written, can heal someone else's attachment wounds. Communication can create opportunities. It cannot replace personal growth. An avoidant person still has to choose whether they want to understand their own patterns and gradually become more emotionally available. Your responsibility is not to become perfect at managing another person's fears. Your responsibility is to communicate honestly, respectfully, and in ways that remain true to your own values. If that creates a healthier connection, wonderful. If it reveals that the relationship cannot meet your emotional needs, that clarity is valuable too. The healthiest relationships are not built on constantly calculating the perfect text. They're built on two people who are both willing to communicate, take responsibility for their patterns, and meet each other with honesty instead of fear. So if you remember one lesson from today's conversation, let it be this. Never send a message simply to reduce your anxiety. Send it because it's genuine. Offer warmth without chasing. Express interest without losing yourself. Leave room for connection without sacrificing your self-respect. When your communication reflects emotional security instead of emotional urgency, you stop trying to convince someone to choose you. Instead, you simply give them the opportunity to know the real you, and that is the strongest foundation any lasting relationship can ever have. If this perspective changed the way you think about avoidant attachment, I'd love to hear your biggest takeaway in the comments. Have you ever experienced someone who cared deeply but struggled to show it? Your story might help someone else understand what they've been trying to make sense of. If you'd like more psychology-based insights on attachment, relationships, emotional healing, and personal growth, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join us for the next conversation. Until then, take care of yourself. Continue growing, and remember that real connection is built not through perfect messages, but through mutual effort, emotional honesty, and the courage to remain authentic. Instead of waiting around for them, start living your own life again. Make plans you have been putting off. Call that friend you've been meaning to catch up with. Go to the gym, take a walk, begin that project you've been delaying, or try something new that excites you. Step out of the emotional waiting room and return your attention to your own life. Something interesting happens when you do this. Avoidant people are usually the ones who create distance. It is how they control the emotional pace of a relationship. They decide when to step back because it helps them feel emotionally safe. But when you are no longer constantly available, always visible, or quietly waiting for them, their inner world begins to shift. Curiosity starts to replace certainty. Despite what many people assume, avoidants are fully capable of missing someone. In fact, they often experience deep longing, but they rarely admit it, sometimes not even to themselves. When someone they genuinely care about becomes less available, those buried feelings begin to rise. Questions naturally appear in their mind. Where did they go? Are they doing okay? Has something changed? Are they losing interest in me? That small sense of uncertainty is not harmful when it develops naturally. It reminds both people that they have their own lives, their own routines, and their own identity outside the relationship. It is not about playing games or creating artificial distance. It is simply about living your own life instead of making another person the center of it. When you decide to reach out again after some time, keep your message light and relaxed. Let it sound as though something honestly reminded you of them, or you came across something you thought they would appreciate. Avoid giving the impression that you have been counting every day of silence or struggling with every passing hour. Simply share the moment because you genuinely wanted to. That balance between giving space and reconnecting naturally is one of the healthiest communication styles you can develop with someone who has avoidant tendencies. It respects their need for independence while still keeping the connection alive without making demands. But there is something even more important than the words themselves. The messages are only the tool. What truly matters is the emotional state behind them. If your mind is constantly focused on this person, if you analyze every word before sending it, replay every reply they give, or spend sleepless nights wondering where you stand, that emotional tension will quietly show through your communication. People are surprisingly good at sensing whether someone feels calm and secure or anxious and desperate, even through a short text message. So while these 4 texting approaches can be helpful, they only work well when they come from the right mindset. The real transformation happens when your attention slowly shifts back toward your own life. Not because you are trying to make them chase you, not because you are following a strategy to increase attraction, but because your own life deserves to become your main focus again. If you are emotionally caught up with an avoidant person, chances are a large part of your day is spent thinking about them. You wonder what they meant, what they might say next, whether you should reach out, or if they are thinking about you too. That reaction is understandable. Relationships with avoidant people often create a powerful cycle of closeness followed by distance. Those unpredictable moments of affection mixed with silence can become emotionally addictive because they activate the brain's reward system in much the same way as other forms of intermittent reinforcement. It is not a weakness or a character flaw. It is simply the way human psychology responds to uncertainty. The healthiest way to break that cycle is by intentionally investing your energy somewhere else. Spend more time on your goals, your friendships, your hobbies, your work, and the experiences that help you grow as a person. Do it because those parts of your life genuinely deserve your attention, not because you hope it will make someone miss you. Ironically, as you become more involved in your own life, something remarkable begins to happen. You naturally become more attractive, not because you are pretending to be confident, but because you are actually becoming someone who is fully engaged in living. That quiet confidence is difficult to fake, and people notice it. Even an avoidant person, who often observes far more than they reveal, can sense the difference. They begin to see someone who is moving forward with purpose instead of someone standing still, waiting for them. And there is something deeply attractive about a person whose life continues to grow, whether someone else chooses to join the journey or not. Not because you are pretending to have a full life, but because you are truly living one. As that happens, the avoidant person, who often notices far more than they ever admit, begins to sense the difference. They see that you are no longer waiting around for them. They notice that your life has direction, that your days are full, and that you are moving forward with purpose. There is something naturally attractive about a person who continues growing instead of standing still. For someone who has spent years emotionally holding themselves back, that kind of quiet confidence can be deeply appealing. Let me take you a little deeper into the psychology of avoidant attachment, because understanding it can help you approach this person with both compassion and realism. Most people with avoidant attachment did not become this way overnight. Early in life, many of them learned that expressing emotional needs was not consistently welcomed. Some grew up with parents who genuinely loved them but felt uncomfortable with strong emotions. Whenever the child looked for comfort, the caregiver might have withdrawn, changed the subject, or encouraged them to simply be strong instead. Others experienced more direct rejection or emotional distance. Whatever the situation, the child reached the same conclusion. Depending on people did not feel safe. If needing others led to disappointment, then the safest option was to convince themselves they did not need anyone at all. Over time, that belief became part of their identity. They learned to rely almost completely on themselves. They told themselves that closeness was optional, that independence was strength, and that emotional distance meant safety. For many years, this way of living protected them. It reduced the risk of feeling abandoned or hurt and gave them a strong sense of control. But it also came with a cost. It kept them from experiencing the kind of lasting emotional connection that every person naturally longs for. Beneath the independence, the emotional distance, and the calm exterior, many avoidant people quietly wish for deeper closeness. They simply do not know how to experience it without their fear taking over. This is why patience can be so important when dealing with someone who has avoidant tendencies. That does not mean endless patience or sacrificing your own needs. It does not mean accepting unhealthy behavior forever. Instead, it means offering a calm, steady presence that communicates you are emotionally stable. You are not trying to trap them. You are not going to panic every time they need a little breathing room. That kind of consistency is uncommon, and to an avoidant person who has spent years expecting emotional pressure or instability, it can feel surprisingly safe. However, there is another truth that is just as important to accept. Not every avoidant person is ready to change. No matter how carefully you communicate, how patient you remain, or how well you manage your own emotions, some people are simply not prepared to face the patterns that keep them distant. Their emotional walls may stay firmly in place for a long time. If that is the reality, continuing to wait forever is not helping either of you. The purpose of these texting approaches is not only to improve communication with them, they are also designed to protect your own emotional well-being. The no-pressure check-in teaches you to release attachment to the outcome. The confident, low-investment message encourages you to stay engaged with your own life instead of revolving around theirs. The open-door callback helps you let go of resentment while remaining respectful, and the disappearing approach reminds you to step fully back into your own world instead of living in constant anticipation. Even if this particular relationship never develops the way you hoped, these habits will still benefit you. They help you become calmer, more emotionally balanced, and more attractive in every future relationship. That is not simply a backup plan, it is one of the greatest rewards of doing this inner work. Now let us talk about the mistakes that often create even more distance, because avoiding the wrong moves is just as important as choosing the right ones. First, never send several messages in a row after receiving no reply. One message is enough to show interest. A second begins to create pressure. A third can feel like pursuit. For someone with avoidant tendencies, that sense of pursuit often activates the very defense mechanism you are trying to avoid. Give your message room to breathe. If they have not answered yet, it does not automatically mean they are ignoring you. They may simply be processing things in the way they naturally do. Allow them that space. Another mistake is using text messages as your main outlet for emotional processing. This is especially common when you feel confused or anxious about the relationship. Late at night, when your mind is filled with unanswered questions, it is tempting to send a long message explaining your feelings or asking for reassurance. Those urges are completely understandable. But with an avoidant person, that kind of emotional intensity usually feels overwhelming rather than inviting. Instead of creating closeness, it often causes them to withdraw further. When you need to process your emotions, talk to a trusted friend, write in a journal, reflect quietly until your thoughts become clearer. Do not expect the avoidant person to carry emotions they have not yet shown they can comfortably handle. That expectation usually places too much pressure on the relationship. Another important point is not to punish them for taking space. Imagine they disappear for several days and eventually reach out again. Your first reaction may be to act distant or respond with short, cold messages so they understand you noticed their absence. Resist that temptation. Responding with emotional punishment only reinforces their deepest fear that closeness eventually leads to rejection, disappointment, or conflict. Instead, greet them with simple, genuine warmth. Nothing dramatic, nothing exaggerated, just something natural like, "Hey, it's good to hear from you." Then continue the conversation at a comfortable pace. That calm response interrupts the pattern they expect. Over time, it helps teach them that reconnecting does not automatically lead to criticism or emotional conflict. Also, avoid explaining yourself in excessive detail. Sometimes an avoidant person says something confusing or emotionally distant, making you feel the need to explain every feeling, every intention, and every thought you have. Keep it simple instead. Honest, clear, and pressure-free communication is much easier for them to receive than long emotional speeches. The shorter and calmer your message is, the easier it becomes for them to stay engaged instead of shutting down. Timing matters as well. When you send a message can be almost as important as what you write. Late-night texts can be risky because people naturally become more emotionally sensitive after the day slows down. If you message at night, keep it light and relaxed. Share something funny or interesting instead of opening a heavy emotional conversation. Morning messages work best when they feel personal rather than routine. Instead of simply saying, "Good morning," include something specific that connects to their day or reminds you of them. That makes the conversation feel more natural instead of creating an obligation to reply. Midday is often one of the easiest times to communicate with an avoidant person. They are usually focused on work or daily responsibilities, so a casual message that requires no immediate response feels comfortable. It allows them to reply whenever they are ready without feeling pressured. After conflict, patience becomes even more important. Give them more time than your instincts suggest. Emotional tension often stays with avoidant people longer than it appears on the surface. Once enough time has passed, reconnect gently. Keep the conversation light unless they choose to discuss the disagreement themselves. Your message should quietly communicate that the emotional atmosphere has settled and that it is safe to reconnect. Finally, remember that loving someone with avoidant attachment is not automatically a mistake. What matters most is whether they recognize their own patterns and are making an honest effort to grow. If they are willing to reflect, learn, and slowly become more emotionally available, healthy change is possible. But if they constantly blame others, avoid responsibility, and refuse to examine their own behavior, the relationship may continue causing unnecessary pain. At the same time, never forget that your needs matter just as much as theirs. If they cannot offer emotional presence, healthy communication, or reasonable consistency, no texting strategy can replace those missing foundations. Give them space when appropriate. Communicate in ways that feel safe instead of overwhelming. But remain honest with yourself. Are they gradually moving toward greater closeness, or are you carrying the relationship alone? You deserve someone who is willing to meet you halfway. These 4 texting approaches work because they fit the psychology of avoidant attachment. They lower emotional pressure, increase feelings of safety, and encourage connection without triggering withdrawal. But your responsibility is not to tear down another person's emotional walls. Only they can choose to do that. Your responsibility is simply to communicate in a way that does not reinforce the fear that built those walls in the first place. In the end, the real goal is much bigger than receiving another text or restarting one conversation. The real goal is becoming calmer, stronger, and more secure within yourself. When you develop that quiet confidence, healthier relationships naturally become possible. You stop trying to convince someone to choose you and instead create the kind of emotional foundation where genuine, lasting connection has the chance to grow.